What surprised Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault in their first day on ice as Nashville Predators? We're going to tell you on today's Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this Friday episode with a hello to our new listeners. I'm guessing some of you may be Tampa Bay fans, our everyday listeners, and of course, a shout out to our Locked On Predators insiders. We appreciate your support. We love that we get to spend a little bit of your day with you. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
On today's show, we are going to talk about the day that was, the day we have all been waiting for, finally arrived yesterday as Nashville's big off-season additions took the ice in gold jerseys with the team for the first day of on-ice practice of training camp. We're going to tell you what Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault had to say about what surprised them the most about their first official practice. We're going to give you some news and some highlights from the day. And we're going to tell you what we saw when it comes to line rushes as well. Before we dive into all of the training camp news, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, Emma, we have been waiting, and it finally officially happened. We were at training camp yesterday for the first day of on-ice practice, the first official day, and got to see Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady, Skjei, and Scott Wedgewood, these big off-season additions in Nashville Predators gold, taking the ice. First of all, overall impression of seeing this team on the ice for the first day of practice.
It was exciting. It's always exciting. It's like the first day of school a little bit. I think it was good to see everyone. It was definitely different, at least for me. I don't know about for you, Ann, but it just felt different than last year, mostly because we thought last year was big with like new coach, new GM, new location for training camp. We're like, wow, this is crazy. But this year it's like an entirely new team almost. And I think you just got a different vibe, and that was kind of, corroborated by what the coaches and the players were saying, which was that it didn't feel like day one of camp. It felt like everyone showed up ready to go. And it was just like, again, last year you felt that new kind of just like, oh, how's this going to go? It wasn't necessarily uneasiness, but it was just, it was different. And so, I think that now this year you definitely got a little bit more of okay, we're here. We know what we're doing. We know what we're here for. Let's get after it. And you could definitely kind of sense that not only in the pace of the practices, but just what the players were saying about it afterwards.
Absolutely agree with that. What I loved about it is it felt like the vibes from the end of last season really had carried over, even with the new additions. And when you add new people, even if they are, these amazing big fish that you got in free agency, when you change the dynamic of a team, you don't 100% know how that's going to sift out. How is that going to impact what the team had built at the end of last year? And I feel like even with these number of new faces, number of new bigger players on this team, the vibes are very good. The vibes are very good. I will also say, you mentioned this, the pace of this practice. Andrew Brunette is just a touch insane on day one of practice. And we saw it last year, just a very high pace. This year, no slower. I mean, it really is an intensely high pace, energy, very demanding practice right out of the gate.
And that's pretty much what you're going to get from Andrew Brunette. Doesn't matter if it's the first day of camp or it's the middle of April. You're going to get the same level of intensity. You're going to get the same, same high pace, high intensity practice. And I think that it was funny last year, we talked about this was a lot of these guys' first time ever skating with Andrew Brunette. And you ask them after the first practice how'd it go, and they're still catching their breath.
Yes.
And it was funny because today or yesterday when they had the first on ice sessions, when Roman Yosi had told us that I guess they tried to give the new guys kind of a heads up, like, just FYI,
So
like,
you know what you're walking into.
you're gonna skate a lot. And I think that even with that warning, the newer guys were still like, oh yeah, they weren't kidding. And
Yes.
so like Steven Stamkos said, that's the most skating I've done in a practice in a long time. And so I think that, it's just, again, kind of a reminder of how demanding Andrew Brunette's system is, but also how demanding his practices are. And so anyone who's going to come in to the system is going to have to level up, to that. You have to be in the right mindset for it. Because even if you're not, again, physically there yet, it's the beginning of camp. That's all right. You kind of work up to it, but you have to have the right mindset that you need to be locked in.
Yeah. I love that we got to talk to Luke Schenn at the end of, they're in different groups at the end of his group's practice. And he came in and he was, you could tell he was tired. You could tell he had worked really hard, but he was saying, I've been off the ice for 20 minutes. I'm still trying to catch my breath. And then was talking about the strength and conditioning coaches. They monitor the players with these electronic chips. And he was like, they were telling us, if you thought last year's practice was hard, you should see the numbers we were doing out there.
And it was funny too, because after Luke Schenn, Andrew Brunette came in and went to go sit down on the chair and goes, "Oh, we had some sweaty players in here." And it's like, well, you're the one to blame for that. Yeah.
You did that. Yeah. Steven Stamkos talked about what sort of surprised him. And he did talk about that pace. He said that's probably one of the fastest day ones I have had at camp in a long time. He also said that he felt like a young kid out there, getting out there and just sort of feeling out his surroundings. A very different first day of camp for Steven Stamkos. The other thing that I thought was really interesting and really great insight, and maybe not something that we have come out and explicitly discussed. Stamkos talked about how different it is to play for a new team when all of your career has been with one team. He's been with Tampa Bay his whole career. And he talks about, yes, there are these system changes that he's going to have to get used to, but so much of what he did in Tampa Bay was instinctual because he was so familiar with what they were doing. And I think, we have to be prepared for Stamkos to have a few times where maybe he is in his head a little bit as he sort of adjusts those instincts to a very different Andrew Brunette practice and game style.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like, you don't want to necessarily say you can go on autopilot, but it's just a little bit, things come a little more natural to you when you've been in one system. I like to think about it like, if I was, I am on the radio and TV and whatnot talking about the Predators a lot. If someone asked me, "Hey, can you hop on the radio in 5 minutes to talk about the Predators?" I mean, like, yeah, no problem. I cover them. I know I've been covering them for years. I've got it. But if someone says, "Hey, can you hop on the radio to talk about the New York Rangers?" It's going to be like, I can, but I'm going to need a minute. Like, I'm just, it's like,
Great analogy.
It's like, I know what to do. I know what storylines to look for. Like, I know the general process, but I'm going to need some more time to do some research. I'm not just going to have it off the top of my head. And that's kind of what this is like, I would imagine, for Steven Stamkos coming in, where it's like, okay, it's not his first training camp. It's not his first practice. It's nothing like that, but it's first time doing it in this new environment with a new team. So it's like, oh, he can't necessarily go on autopilot, maybe like he has been before. And that's not to say that he was coasting or not putting any effort in, but it's just
Right.
how things come more naturally to you when you've been in it for so long.
Yeah. It's going to be fun to watch how that goes for him. He talked about it's going to take training camp. It's going to take some preseason games. It's going to take a little bit into the season for the instinctual part of his game to adjust to a new system, to new line mates, to new teammates. And it's something to keep our eye on as we go through training camp. But really great vibes, I think, from Steven Stamkos, who has been put through a huge career change, a huge life change as well. But, it was great to talk to him. Great energy, very positive about what's going on. Coming up, we're going to tell you what Jonathan Marchessault had to say was the biggest surprise for him about coming to the Nashville Predators. We're also going to tell you what those two players had to say about Tommy Novak. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. If all of this hockey talk has you wanting to get a Predators tickets to a regular season game or a preseason game, friends, you've got to check out the deals at Gametime. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to get tickets to your favorite sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, theater, and more. Gametime now has this new feature. It's called Gametime Picks, and it makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Gametime also has their lowest price guarantee, which means if you find a seat in the same section and row for less, Gametime is going to credit you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Emma, we got a chance to talk to a number of players. And of course, we were very excited to talk to Steven Stamkos, his first day in a gold jersey officially at training camp with the Predators. Same thing with Jonathan Marchessault. Really talked a lot about expectations going into this game. And I thought he made such an interesting point, because expectations are higher for the Nashville Predators, but Marchessault pointed out it's in a little bit of a different way, because the expectations are based on off-season moves. It's not based on, hey, they were so close last season. Like, this is a team that's been contending for 2 seasons and now it's time. It's a very different level of expectation. And I thought that was kind of a unique way to look at it, because he likes that there are expectations, but he said, they're not super high expectations. And he also commented on, you just have to take things one day at a time. Veteran perspective, if ever you've heard it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I do think that was a good kind of distinction to make too, about how there's expectations, yes, but there's different kinds of expectations. And it's not, again, it's like, hey man, you're part of the reason for some of these high expectations. Right. And so it's, I think it's good though, because I think he's coming from a team where, that was the expectation on them, for those kinds of expectations, like you were saying, where it's like, this has been a team that's been so close. And that was kind of the situation in Vegas. Now he's trying to help lead this Predators team to that point. So I think, like you said, very good veteran perspective, if you've ever heard it.
Expectations based on potential. And look, from what we saw, it's only day one. We know it's only day one, but from what we saw, it's going to be a really exciting year. I do love Jonathan Marchessault was asked about like what has surprised you so far. Like, yes, relatively new here. This is what he said, and I loved this perspective. He said, "You know what surprised me a lot was how tight of a group it is here. I've been in a spot that we had a really tight group, and I didn't think there was something like that somewhere else." And showing up here, I think it's really similar. It's a tight group, and they welcome the new players really well. And he went on to say the reflection of a good team on the ice is the reflection of their chemistry off the ice as well. And I think that's something that gets done in the first few weeks and months of the season. I'm definitely happy to be a part of that. I think again, we talk about like the momentum and the on ice momentum that carried over into this first day of training camp. I think the locker room vibes, I think what was created last year has carried over in that has made an impression on Jonathan Marchessault. And he said, wait a minute, I didn't know I could find that here. You got to love that. Like, that's really encouraging.
Well, and I think it speaks to when we heard from Barry Trotz at the beginning of the day, and talking to him about various things. And one of the things that Barry Trotz mentioned was, when it comes to, when we were adding pieces in the off season, what were we looking for? And it was talking about building a team, building a champion. And one thing he said was like, our culture's there. We got our culture there. Like that's established. And I think that that's something that maybe kind of gets glossed over sometimes, because it's like, you don't really see it. If you're not around the team all the time, it's not necessarily something that you see as a fan. But B, because it's something that it doesn't just happen. I don't think it's something that you have to work for. It kind of the same as skill and practice. And you're not just gonna step on the ice and be amazing at hockey without trying. And you can't expect a culture, like building a team culture, to be like that either. And so I think that that's something that this team, this organization, this leadership group has put a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of effort into building this culture. And I think that that's something that even we may be guilty of, kind of glossing over sometimes, because that is a really important piece that, is the result of a lot of dedication and hard work.
Yeah. And I think a lot of credit needs to, of course, go to Yosi and Saros and Forsberg, Colton Sissons, but also I think a lot of that is what people like Ryan O'Reilly and Gus Nyquist and Luke Schenn brought last season as well. They brought that culture, that winning culture, and it's about relationship. It's not necessarily, like you said, it's not about skill. It's about relationship, but you do have to work hard to build that culture. And so a ton of credit to the guys that came in last year, those veterans, but also to Barry Trotz, because you have to have that first. You have to have that first if you want the on ice product to really click well. So really interesting insight from Jonathan Marchessault. And I think probably really encouraging for him to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm landing in a place where I can invest and be invested in the way that I was in Vegas. It's not an anomaly. So that was great. One of the things that we need to talk about are the line rushes. Now, want to preface this, friends, Romans countrymen, with the fact that this was day one in training camp. And we know that anything can happen in training camp. But let's just talk. Let's just chat about what we saw, Emma. It seems like Forsberg, O'Reilly, Nyquist, just in talking to Forsberg, he's like, yeah, I'd really like to stay together with them. Or if that was Ryan O'Reilly. But the gist is, the trio, they feel pretty good about playing together. And then, interestingly enough, we saw Jonathan Marchessault, Tommy Gumby Novak, we'll explain that in a minute, and Steven Stamkos together, which is one of the things that we've talked about and speculated about ad nauseum this offseason. What could that line look like? Well, that's the line that they rolled out today in day one of practice. Let's just remember this was only day one. And so talk to Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault about Tommy Novak. And I love this. Steven Stamkos referred to him, my friends, as he's a slippery player.
And I said, you know what? That is a great way to describe him, honestly.
Yes.
It's like it's so funny because there was a play there in practice where he, kind of went careening into the into the boards there, and he's hunched over and everyone's like, "Oh, is he okay? Is he okay?" And everyone we asked about it afterwards just kind of laughed. They're like, "Yeah, he's fine."
He's
they're
good.
like
Yeah.
they're like
Bruno referred to
only
him as Gumby. Oh, he's
yeah.
Gumby.
He was like, I think Bruno was like, "Yeah, only Novi could do that. He happens to just like get out of the way just at the right time. He's like Gumby." And that, I think is what Stamkos was referring to when he said he's slippery. He just kind of slips in and out, he's very, he's he's smooth and he's quick, but he's not like big or flashy about it. So
Mhm.
he just kind of, that allows him just kind of whoop, slip out, slip around and get, one of the things Marchessault said about playing with Novak was just kind of, I mean, he didn't say this exactly, but just talking about what a skilled playmaker he is, because what he did say was just like the way he passes the puck, the way that he lays it out there is just so perfect. And I think he is, and Stamkos mentioned that too. And Stamkos said for a guy who likes to shoot the puck, big fan of that. And
Love it.
so I think that that's, if that line again, day one, but if that line, if they can build chemistry and if it works, then I am very excited about this. Now, I also am well aware that Andrew Brunette is not going to try to fit a square peg in a round hole. If it's not working, it's not working. And we can't really know after one day of camp. So you never know. Maybe tomorrow and the rest of camp he tries a completely different combination and then it's that looks better. Again, what was it Barry Trotz said Thursday morning? It was like it's fantasy hockey until
Yes.
they drop the puck or something like
Right.
that. So I think that right now it is fun. It is like fantasy hockey. You get to plug and play all your pieces and see what works best, and that's kind of the point of camp.
Yep. The one thing I loved about watching those three together when we did see them kind of playing together is that Tommy Novak does not stand out as the guy who's not quite. He doesn't look like the guy who's not quite.
Yeah.
That was a line that looked like they were all playing well together. Now, that is not to say that Tommy Novak is the same thing as Steven Stamkos, only younger. I am not saying that. But I'm just saying when it comes to playing with those kind of high level players like Marchessault and Stamkos, and Andrew Brunette said this, he thinks the game. Novak thinks the game at a high level, and you could see that he is thinking the game at that kind of level. Again, don't come at me. I understand that Steven Stamkos is one thing and Tommy Novak may be another, but nothing about that really stood out as like, ooh, one of these things is not like the other. And that was really good to see for the first day.
Yeah. No, I think it kind of it is good to see because it's one of the things that we kind of speculated about, which was maybe with some more skilled line mates, then Tommy Novak will elevate his game. And yes, it's only been one practice, but I think that so far, the early returns are positive.
Yes. Yes, that's right. We are Steve Kornacki doing the election. The early returns look like this statistically. Coming up, we're going to tell you about the other lines that we saw in day one of training camp and update you on a player we didn't see there. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You have heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we've got something a little bit different for you from FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So be sure you check out this great deal at fanduel.com. Again, visit fanduel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook. Just want to touch on a couple of the other lines we saw in, again, emphasizing this strongly. Day one of practice at training camp. Tomasino, Colton Sissons, and Luke Evangelista. And you and I had talked about this. Here's what's real about Colton Sissons. Colton Sissons makes everybody better. And if you want to see two players whose game could be elevated, Tomasino and Evangelista could do a lot worse than being centered by Colton Sissons.
It's true. He is the ultimate safety net, as we say. And I think that he is the kind of guy that if you're trying to pull something out of a player, especially a younger player, he's a good guy to have kind of anchoring that line. And so, I mean, I liked it. It was a combination that I had not considered, I don't think, but it's not bad, and I think that it adds some more depth beyond your top six, if that is what they end up rolling with. If you have Tomasino in that spot, then you have either Jankowski or Parsonen on that, that identity line. If they keep that line together, I think that it could end up looking really good.
Yep. When you talk about that identity line, of course, the big absence on that fourth line, identity line, Kiefer Sherwood in Vancouver. We miss you, Kiefer Sherwood. In running lines yesterday, it was Smith, McCarron, and Zachary Leroux. And, I've said before, I think Zachary Leroux may be the best, like, one-for-one comparison for Kiefer Sherwood, except in experience. And that's where I think, they may see what he can do here, but I agree with you. I think, like a Parsonen with a little bit more experience in the NHL, a Jankowski with more experience is probably more likely long-term, but they ran with it just to see what he could do on that line. And I thought that was kind of fun to watch. The other, when we're talking about combinations, Roman Yosi, in talking with him, said, he would really like to play with Brady Skjei. So that is a defensive pairing that I think a lot of people could get very excited about.
Yeah, that was another one that we kind of speculated. And I mean, look, you don't sign Brady Skjei for $7 million a year to bury him on your third defensive pairing. So I think that's always kind of been the goal. The idea is, hey, we play him. Now that means that Roman Yosi, again, he's a left shot defenseman, but let's be honest, Roman Yosi doesn't play aside. Even when he's technically on the left, he's everywhere. And that's the beauty of having someone like him. So I think people get, so caught up in like, oh, you got to pair a left-hander with a right-hander, and sometimes that's true, but when you have Roman Yosi, again, that is just the beauty of having someone like him. And I think that now the difference being, he's willing to, but does he like to? And he told us today and on Thursday that he likes playing the right side. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, so it's not just something that you will do if you have to. It's like, no, I enjoy it. So I think that it's good. It kind of pretty much solidifies that top pairing. Again, they're going to try all the combinations. They're going to try Yosi on the left, put him back with Dante Fabro or Alex Carrier, any of the right-handed defensemen they have. They're going to run through all the combinations. But I think just kind of hearing that confirmation that not only can Yosi play the right side, but he likes to. And I think that that's going to be, a really good, a really exciting pairing to watch.
Absolutely. One of the players that we didn't see at camp was a defenseman. Spencer Stasny is out of training camp for personal reasons. Don't have any other information for you other than that. Whatever it is, that we love Spencer Stasny and, wishing him the best with whatever is going on. Barry Trotz did talk about the fact that, there is then maybe an opening for another defenseman to make a push to either make the roster or be the next man up. And look, when he starts rattling off names, you realize there's a lot of depth potential here on the blue line. He talked about Mark Del Gaizo, and again, it was day one. Mark Del Gaizo, first of all, had a shot from the blue line that went through traffic and scored a goal, and it was chef's kiss. again, it's just training camp and practice, but also just looked really strong, I thought, when he was playing in his group. But Adam Wilsby, Tanner Molendijk, of course, you and I have talked about Andrew Gibson. There is a lot of depth on the blue line that the Predators can tap into. And so I think those players are going to get an extra long look depending on what happens with Spencer Stasny as well. So that's going to be a big storyline coming out of training camp, I think, as well.
Yeah, you do get an idea of all the guys you just mentioned. You've got Jake Livingstone, Ryan Ufko, all of these, it shows you, the system's in pretty good shape right now. We're in a good spot when it comes to defense. Now, I still think, I will say, I have said this before and I stand by it. I firmly believe there's only one player on last year's Milwaukee Admirals roster, like one who didn't finish the season with the Predators, let me just say, who I genuinely believe is ready to play in the NHL right now, and that is Mark Del Gaizo. I think that he is the only one that is truly ready right now. He is very reliable. He had a very small sample size in the NHL last season, but he is so dependable. He did not make any mistakes. You put him out there, you know what you're going to get. If something happens, if God forbid, one of your starting defensemen is injured or can't play for whatever reason, I personally, if I'm Andrew Brunette, I have no qualms, no worries about putting Mark Del Gaizo in the lineup and, believing that he can play exactly how I want him to play. So, yes, people like to get excited about these young guys, about the Tanner Molendijks and the Andrew Gibsons, and this is not a knock on them. And even, Barry Trotz mentioned it, that yes, these are guys who can compete for these spots. That's why they're at camp. But I just think that, it's just a little reminder that these guys are, they're not fully cooked yet. And they're so talented, they're so good, but they're not fully cooked. I consider Mark Del Gaizo to be fully cooked, and I would, if it were me, I would have him on the NHL roster on opening night.
Yes, absolutely agree. And again, small sample size in the NHL, small sample size on day one of Predators camp. But I agree with you. I thought Del Gaizo looked fantastic and you remember he came in last year and hit it out of the park at training camp. So if you thought last year's training camp was good, my expectations for Del Gaizo, very high in training camp. We have talked about Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, Brady, Skjei, but let's talk about the news and the update that we got from training camp on day one that we know our listeners have tuned in to hear. Friends, we talked to Jeremy Lauzon about Jake Quillen.
We did. And as you might expect from the NHL's hits leader, not even the least bit phased by a porcupine.
No.
And
he pet Jake Quillen.
He pet the porcupine. We did get some insight. He told us that apparently Jake Quillen is, I think, 11 years old, and this is what he does. He does these kinds of public appearances. He's a porcupine model, and so he was just very used to it. He's like, oh, this again? Okay, just feed me and pet me. I don't care. And I was like, honestly, what a life. That sounds great. But we got a little bit further insight into why he was maybe not fazed by a porcupine. And we found out that he actually went on safari in Africa for his honeymoon this summer. So he's like, yeah, I was right next to lions and, elephants and rhinos. And it's like, okay, yeah, so a porcupine probably.
Yeah. Jake Quillen probably was not super threatening after that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So look, that is the update. I know you have tuned in through this entire episode to get. That is the news on Jeremy Lauzon and Jake Quillen. We are here for all of the things that actually really matter when it comes to the Nashville Predators. You heard it here first. Of course, more going on this weekend at training camp. They are going to be back at practice tomorrow. They have 2 games against Florida, preseason Hockey is here this weekend on Sunday, y'all. It's going to be great. You know, Emma and I are going to be back here Monday. We're going to be talking about what we saw at practice on Saturday. We're going to talk about what we saw in the games on Sunday. And of course, keep you updated on everything happening with the Nashville Predators. So make sure you're following the podcast on social media, LO_Predators. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Emma, before we sign off, where can everyone find you and your work?
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen. You can also find me at Fordyce Bellevue over the weekend, where we should start getting our mail there probably. And you can find my work online at the Hockey News.
And you can find me on social media at AnnK_Mama on Ice. You can find me at Fordyce Center Bellevue or in traffic trying to get to Fordyce Center Bellevue, one or the other. You can find my work at Penalty Box Radio as well. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are going to be back on Monday with an all new episode and all your training camp updates. We'll see you then.